אומרים, סליחה, יהודי, כל מה שאתם אומרים שומעים עכשיו, כל העולם. איפה עכשיו נותן שיעור? אתה רוצה להיות פה בזמן השיעור?
סליחה?
אני פה נותן עכשיו שיעור.
אפשר להישאר פה?
תישאר. Hi everybody. I'm sorry that the Zoom didn't work. Apparently their whole network fell. And אתה יכול להדליק לו את האור רק? Okay. So we're going to continue a little bit from what we did last week with the coronavirus. But let me just fix this. It's a little in the wrong direction. Hello Dina, hello Shoshana, Isadora, whoever else is watching. So this is a series of classes on faith and confidence, which is basically what we call Jewish coaching. And this is the 48th class. Now is a good time, since everybody's locked away at home, to watch the whole series. The whole series is available on my Patreon account, which is patreon.com/MGENUTH. There's probably a link somewhere on my Facebook page as well. And what we're going to talk about today is actually we're starting a new chapter in our meditations on faith and confidence, on the difference between them. And so we're going to start, if you have the text, we're on chapter 6. So I don't have a translation here, but I'll translate it as we go along. The topic today will be the difference between the faith that was instrumental in bringing about the redemption from Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, and the faith that's needed today in order to bring about the final redemption. The big difference, as we'll see, is that the redemption from Egypt transformed faith into what we call passive confidence, and the faith today will be transformed, or needs to be transformed, into what we call active confidence. And that's the big difference between the two. All of this is hinted to and alluded to, according to the inner teaching of the Torah, in the special name that God gave Moshe Rabbeinu before they came out of Egypt. If you remember, Moshe Rabbeinu asked Hashem, if they ask me, what is your name, what shall I tell them? And Hashem's answer was, Ekyeh asher ekyeh, I will be what I will be, meaning that is the name by which he redeems them. A name in the Torah means how Hashem reveals himself in the world. Hashem is called by the actions that he takes. So when the actions change, the name changes. Ekyeh asher ekyeh means that I will redeem them with the name I will be. Now, when you think about this name, this is certainly the most important name when you're talking about coaching, when you're talking about helping somebody achieve their potential, becoming what they're destined to be, what I am, to be what I am. I will be what I am. I will be what I can be, as it were. So by giving this name, God was giving the strength, the ability to transform the reality in Egypt into redemption. That was the purpose of this name. But he gives it twice. He says, I will be what I will be. He doesn't say Ekyeh just once. Afterwards he does repeat it just once. We'll get into that later. But he says, I will be what I will be. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. And there's a question about why does he have to mention it twice. Rashi on the verse says, just as I was with them in this exile, in the exile from Egypt, so I will be with them, with the Jewish people, in the final exile, which is the exile that we're in now. So just as I was there in Egypt, I will be with them in the future, just as I am giving them this name to redeem them out of Egypt now, so I am giving them this same name, but as we'll see with the difference, like we said, to redeem themselves in the future when it's time to come out of the final exile and into the final redemption. So the same name applies twice. The same thing happens in a person also, that there's a process in life in which the first time that you're redeemed, or the first time, let's call it, that you attain some kind of measure of success, you only need to exercise the first name, which translates into passive confidence, as we'll see. And the second time, when you want to repeat the success, you want to be able to attain once again a level of success that requires already active confidence. And it's not as easy as the first time. What it also we see is that there's also a big difference in terms of the number of years that they were there. They were only there for 210 years, meaning that to get to passive confidence, to the first Ehyeh, only requires a short amount of time. But to get to the higher level of Ehyeh, Asher Ehyeh, the higher level, as we'll explain it later, which transforms into active confidence, into me actually doing things to better my situation, that requires, as we've seen, we've been 2,000 years in exile, much longer, because there's a lot more energy that has to be taken and transformed into confidence, into the ability to act. Okay, so we're going to read a little bit from the text, and the text, as those who are regular participants in this series know, and today I open it up for everybody because, I'm sure that it's probably better to watch this than to keep reading the news, which I don't think really helps you very much. And this might actually be more interesting, or maybe help you in the future or right now. So I opened this up today so that everybody could watch this. So as the text we're learning is a book called Lev Ladat. Let me see if I can get it here. Lev Ladat from Rav Ginsburg. And this is his basic text, his most foundational text on psychology. And as it is built on the inner teachings of Torah, there's a lot of technical knowledge that's needed in order to decipher it, if you will. But I try to do that during these classes so that it becomes clear how to turn this into something that you can use every day. So he writes like this in chapter 6. So faith and confidence are hinted to in the name of the redemption. I will be what I will be. As Rashi says, imam b'tzara zot, asher imam b'shiabud shar malchuyot. I will be, the first I will be, as I am now with them here in the exile in Egypt, and I will redeem them. And I will be in the future also with all other exiles, which is really referring to our exile, our continuous long 2,000-year exile. Now he writes, Kayom, today, aleinu lamshich et makif ha'emunah shel ha'eki hasheni. Today, our task, meaning in our age, our task is to be able to draw down the second form of I will be, which is more difficult than the first form. Oh, Yafa, good thing you could join. So, our task now is the second Ehyeh. What was the first Ehyeh about? The first Ehyeh was the belief that the Jewish people had when in Egypt that they would be redeemed. They also received a prophecy from Jacob himself and from Joseph that said, "Pakod yifkod Elokim etchem," you will be redeemed. But we read the Torah anachronistically. We read it with the end already known. But to get ourselves into the mindset of somebody who was living in the Egyptian bondage, in the slavery that they experienced there in Egypt, for 210 years, they had to hold themselves and believe, and they didn't have the Torah yet. So they had to really hold themselves firm and continue to believe that they would be redeemed. So that was their task during those 210 years, to believe, but it's close belief, it's easy belief. Why is it relatively easy? Because it was for a shorter period of time, even though it didn't span the lifetime of any single individual. So there were individuals who were born and passed away within that frame of time, within those 210 years. It wasn't so easy for them. But they knew, or somebody had known, the prophet who had told them that they would be redeemed. So either they knew Joseph, or their father knew Joseph, or maybe their father even knew Jacob. And they had heard that prophecy, and they maybe even had all kinds of calculations about when this would happen. So, relatively speaking, that's called a near surrounding light. It means that every person has more than what we know. We are also inspired by things that are beyond us. So there's what we call close inspiration and far inspiration. The close inspiration is this first I will be, which says to them, know that you will be given the strength to persevere through this exile and also to be redeemed. And that strength comes from what we call the near inspiring light, or the near surrounding light, makif karov. But in our generation, that's already been used up, as it were. That near inspiration has already been used up. I'm talking now on a historical level, not yet talking about each individual, but on a historical level. As a people, that we've already used up, that near surrounding light, that near inspiration. But there's the far inspiration, which is called Mashiach, which has a higher name. It's not just called Moshe, it's called Mashiach. Their Redeemer was called Moshe. Our Redeemer is called Mashiach, as it were. And that is trying to tell us that in our generation we have to take from the far surrounding light. We have to take that inspiration that comes from afar. The pasuk is Etzot merachok emuna omen. Our faith comes from afar. What does it mean to take it from afar? That it's been 2,000 years. Nobody knows the prophets who prophesied this final redemption that's coming now. Nobody knows who they were. Nobody even knows, we hardly know where they're buried, these prophets. But we know because their writings have persevered. And we know because it's in our far surrounding light. It's a far away inspiration that we can take from now, but it's a challenge. It's more difficult in that sense. But the gain is that when you take from the further inspiring light, what you can do is you can transform, or you're required to transform that light, that energy, into what we call active confidence. And active confidence means that it's up to me to see this through. God has given me He's sanctioned me. He's giving me the role to do what I can to bring the Mashiach, to bring the redemption. That's what far surrounding light churning into something integrated into the psyche means. It means that it's turned into something active that we have to act. And as we've explained in many of the previous classes, the difference between active confidence and passive confidence is that active confidence is, or it parallels what we call the sphere of victory, netzach, which some people will say is like the right foot, and passive confidence parallels the sphere of acknowledgement, or hod, and that's like the left foot. That's an easy way of thinking of them. But really, as we've talked about it much, much more in depth, it's more the right kidney and the left kidney. Even more than that, it's the right adrenal gland and the left adrenal gland. And these create the energy needed in each of us to do what we can to bring the final redemption. So, again, to recap, In the first redemption, the exile from Egypt and the exodus from Egypt, they took from the first name Ekyeh, from the first name I will be, and they transformed that energy into what's called passive confidence. In our generation, what's needed is to take from the far surrounding light, which is hinted to by the second name I will be, because again it says I will be what I will be, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, and the second one, the second name Ekyeh, the second I will be, refers to the far surrounding light, which is higher, and we'll explain in a moment what that is. And from that we take into ourselves, we integrate into ourselves and transform it into what we call active confidence, meaning that it's up to us to act to bring the redemption. So let me just read this again once more in Hebrew. Kayom aleinu lehamshich et makif haemunah shel ha'ekyeh hasheni. Why are they related? Because we have a verse in Micha that says, Ki mei tzeitcha me'eretz Mitzrayim er'enu niflaot. And this by itself is amazing because Micha equals the prophet who prophesies this, that the final redemption is similar to the redemption from Egypt, because in each case we are required to build confidence. The prophet who prophesies this, Ki mei tzeitcha me'eretz Mitzrayim er'enu niflaot, in the same manner in which you departed Egypt, so I will show you miracles or wonders in the future from the final redemption. In the final redemption, the prophet who made that comparison between our redemption and between Egypt's redemption, the exodus from Egypt, was Micah or Micha, Mem Yud Kaf Hey, which we already know is equal to bitachon. Bitachon is equal to 75. Micha is also equal to 75, meaning the prophet Micha, his prophecies are centered on the issue of building confidence in the person. So that in general, again, today, it's very common for people to walk around with a small chapter 7 of Rabbeinu Bachye's Chovot HaLevavot, the duties of the heart. Why? Because chapter 7 there is about confidence. Everybody who does something in their lives, business or whatever it is, they walk around. It's become like a kameh, almost like a segula that you walk around. Hopefully, it's also studied and learned and then practiced. What did they do before there was Rabbeinu Bachya? So they walk around with a small Sefer Micha. The Sefer Micha, which equals bitachon, which equals confidence. That's what gave people the strength in the past. Hopefully they opened it in a small scroll, and they opened it and they read it, and they gained from there, from that text, the insights that they needed in order to have trust, to have confidence in God, to have confidence in themselves. But again, the big difference is that during the exodus from Egypt, it was passive confidence. Why was it passive confidence? Because we see that to leave Egypt, they didn't do anything. In fact, the real plague was the plague of the firstborns. What were the Jewish people required to do? Nothing. They were required to sit in their homes. This reminds us of the meme that's going around now. Your grandparents were asked to fight 2 world wars. All you need to do to save the world is just sit on your couch. You can probably do it. So that's what the redemption from Egypt was like. It was being able to just sit at home and not go out all night. And when they woke up in the morning, they were ready to leave. The same thing happened when they came to the Red Sea. They also were not required to, but they had to have confidence. That's what passive confidence means. That even though I don't have the tools, I don't have the ability to get myself out of this situation, God does. And all I'm being required is not just to sit on my couch passively, really, but to believe and have trust passively that really this situation will change. And we've explained many times that to have passive confidence is what the Rebbe would call, the famous statement from the Baal Shem Tov, tracht gut wird sein gut, which means think good and it will be good. To think good is a passive act. When you're thinking, you're not doing anything active. And yet, you at least need to do that. You have to be able to picture how the redemption will look once Hashem acts. That's what's That's what's called passive confidence. Active confidence, which is what we're being required to do today, is something much higher. And it requires that I actively participate and not just picture what the redemption is going to look like, not just to envision it, but to also make a plan about what needs to be done in order to bring about that redemption. That's the difference between passive confidence and active confidence. So again, Micha, he's the one who tells us that the final redemption will be similar to the redemption from Egypt. The difference only is that in the redemption from Egypt, they were only required to turn faith into passive confidence. And in this generation, we are required to turn faith into active confidence. Why this difference? So I also already gave a hint to this. That the first Ekyeh, it actually refers to the sphera of Bina, of understanding. The second Ekyeh refers to the sphera of crown. That's how Rashi explains it. That's the Pshuto Shel Mikra. That's the simple, the literal meaning of these words. I will be what I will be. So let me read the note here in Hebrew. לפי פירוש רש"י, על פי חז"ל, פשוטו של מקרא, שפנימיות סודו מתבאר בפרק זה, הסדר הוא מלמטה למעלה. They go from below to above. The first Ekyeh is Bina, and the second Ekyeh is Keter, is the crown. הסדר הוא מלמטה למעלה. דהיינו שהאקיה הראשון מכוון כנגד הבינה, מקום גילוי הביטחון, כי בו ישמח ליבנו כי בשם קודשו בטחנו. We've talked about this in previous classes, this important verse. That through joy comes about confidence, comes about the ability to trust. And again, in this case, it was only to trust passively. ואילו האקי השני מכוון כנגד הכתר. אמונה פשוטה, מקיף הרחוק, עצות מרחוק, אמונה אומן. So the second Ekyeh, Asher Ekyeh, that already, according to Rashi, is the future redemption. And in the future redemption, the energy comes from the crown, from the higher source. And that higher source is called Emunah. That itself is called faith. The crown itself is called faith. So in the first redemption, there was, according to the literal explanation offered by Rashi, it was more about being joyful. And in our redemption, in our generations, it's about having faith that turns into active confidence. אך בדרך כלל בספרים הקדושים הסדר הוא מלמעלה למטה. But in Kabbalah, in Chassidus, it's the opposite. It doesn't go the way that Rashi explains it. Again, we said that in Rashi, it's from Bina to Keter. Ekyeh asher Ekyeh, the first Ekyeh is Bina, the second Ekyeh is Keter. The first Ekyeh is understanding, the second Ekyeh is crown. But in Kabbalah, in the inner teachings of the Torah, and in Chassidus, it's the opposite, that it goes from above to below, so that the first Ekyeh, ha'Ekyeh harishon b'Keter v'hasheni b'Bina, the first Ekyeh, it's as if in the first redemption, the redemption from Egypt, they took from the crown, and now we have to take from understanding. So how do we explain this? How do we explain this? How can you understand this discrepancy? So first of all, it makes sense that there's a discrepancy, because the whole purpose of Pnimius Torah, the whole purpose of the inner teachings of the Torah, is to reveal a hidden motivation behind the literal interpretation. So if the literal meaning is that the first Ekyeh is their redemption, the redemption from Egypt, and the literal meaning is that the second Ekyeh is our redemption, the final redemption. So the Pnimius of the Torah comes and reveals a deeper motivation inside. So how does this mean? והיינו שעל פי הסוד, העיקר תלוי באיזו זכות ועבודה פנימית זכו בני ישראל לאקיה עמם. Really, the question here is, we said that afterwards Hashem says to him, he says, I will be what I will be. And in the same verse he continues and he says, tell them I will be with them. So he repeats it actually 3 times. The third time is just about the redemption from Egypt. How does Rashi explain? Why does he have to repeat it a third time in the verse? So he says, because Moshe Rabbeinu said to God, I'm coming to redeem them now from Egypt. This was difficult enough. You want me to tell them I will be what I will be, meaning there's this redemption and there's going to be a greater redemption later on. Why do I have to tell them about the troubles that are going to come? It's enough that they have their own troubles. And they want to hear about being redeemed from their situation. They don't want to be worried about what's going to happen in another 3,000 years. That's not interesting to them. So Hashem said, okay, Eki Eimam. I will be with them. That's what you should tell them in the end. Don't tell them both names. But in the Torah, in the Chumash, Hashem wrote both names so that we would know that the same name that was instrumental in bringing them out of Egypt is the same name, is the same force, the same energy that will be instrumental in bringing us out of the exile. So the inner teachings of the Torah, they come to explain that relationship. ביציאת מצרים עיקר הזכות הייתה מצד האמונה הפשוטה במשך רדוש שנות הגולה כדלקמן בפנים. אך לעתיד לבוא עיקר הזכות תהיה מצד הביטחון החזק המתבטא במעשה בפועל להחיש את הקץ. Okay, so really what's happening here is that by reversing the order, the inner teachings of the Torah are telling us the following principle. That to come out of Egypt, all they needed was faith. But for us, that's the keter. That's the first ekiyah, according to the inner teachings of the Torah. According to the inner teachings of the Torah, we need understanding, bina. What's important about bina in this case? That bina is the beginning of feeling a sense of self, feeling a sense of being. Bina is about being. In fact, I don't know if anybody's ever studied this, if there's a connection between the word being and bina. Because bina in Kabbalah means tchilat hayesh, or as we call it sometimes, the possibility of being. Being means, what's the big difference? There's two ways you can live your life. You can live your life nullified, meaning that I have no separate being, I have no being. Leave the word separate aside, I shouldn't have said that. I don't have a sense of being. I don't have a sense of being in the world. I'm detached from reality. I only live in my spiritual world. I'm not connected to anything. That's sort of the way that the Jewish people lived during the last 2,000 years. Detached from reality. Detached from the world. Bina is the beginning of creation, because Bereshis, Bria, all Bria is Bina actually. It's all understanding. It's all about looking, Bina, the first thing that a person looks at, the first thing a person understands is the reality of the natural world. That's the beginning of all meditation. As the Rambam writes, the first thing you need to learn about is the natural world, and from meditating on the natural world, you come to understand the greatness of God, and you come to love and fear God. So Bina is the beginning of being. It's a beginning, there's three words here that start with a B. Bina, beginning, and being. That's how to remember them. They're actually very similar. Beginning and being probably has also some kind of connection. In our redemption, it's necessary to have a sense of being. It's not enough to be nullified. It's not enough to just be ayin, to be nothingness. You have to be, the opposite of nothingness is being. So in our redemption, what the inner teachings of the Torah are saying is that in our redemption, the second ekiyah, again, we're going from above to below, from crown to understanding. That's the inner interpretation. So the second ekiyah is understanding. It's bina. It's being. So in our redemption, in order to leave the exile, to change reality, to reveal godliness in the world, requires a person to feel being. And it's not about being nullified. By the way, when you meditate upon this just a little, you think about it just a little, you understand everything that the Rebbe did with shluchim. Because a shaliach is actually somebody who's first of all about being. He's somewhere. He plants himself somewhere. He becomes a fixture. It's something that you can always refer to. You see him. In the past, before the Rebbe started his campaigns, before the Lubavitch Rebbe started his work, the thinking was that somehow Yiddishkeit has to be something in the background. It doesn't have to be seen. His whole transformation was, somebody called it very nicely, turning Judaism outwards, but I would call it, instead of turning Judaism outwards, it's taking Judaism from a state of being in the background to being in the foreground, and saying that this is what will redeem the world. This is what changes the world. So you have to enter into a state of being, not into a state of nothingness or being not important as it was before. Even though Jews in their heads maybe thought, what we do by learning Torah and davening is all very important. But it was all done from a sense of nothingness, from a sense of not being important, not being in the world. But the whole frame of mind for this redemption has to change. It has to become that we're doing out of a sense of being in the world. And that sense, that change, that shift in our consciousness is what prepares the world to reveal godliness everywhere. So one of the examples is the shluchim. That you send a shaliach somewhere, you're making him into a being. You're making him into something that takes up space. There's a Chabad house. There's a space there that is supposed to emanate. It's supposed to give a feeling that there's godliness here. So godliness from being in the background has to transform and become in the foreground. And that's done through our own change, our own sense that we are now emissaries of this divinity, and therefore we have to be here. You can't, that's also one of the reasons why there's no reason to leave where you are. If divine providence has put you in a particular place in the world, and you have what to do there, so that's your being. You have to be there. To be there is not just to take up space in the sense that you eat and you drink and you have a house. It's that the house itself, like the Rebbe wanted, has to become a house that emanates godliness. It emanates the holiness of the Torah and of Jewish life. And that way becomes a light unto the nations. So all this is just about these two words, Eki asher eki. I will be what I will be. The first Eki, again, according to the literal meaning, it goes from understanding to crown. And according to the inner meaning, it goes from crown to understanding. And we just explained the differences between those two. Let's take a look at something very interesting. So, Emunah here, let me just recap just a little bit and change the words just a tiny bit so that we can follow this better. Passive confidence is more like faith. And active confidence is what we call confidence. That's the ultimate form of confidence. Again, passive confidence is when there's nothing I can do. So in the first redemption, the redemption from Egypt, the Jewish people were more passive. And they didn't have to do anything to get out of Egypt, and they didn't have to do anything to cross the Red Sea, to be saved from the Egyptians. They also didn't have to do anything to bring Torah down. All they had to do was wait. They failed in that because they didn't wait for another 6 hours. But again, they were only required to wait and, in a sense, shev ve'al taseh, don't do anything yet. It says that if Moshe Rabbeinu would have gone with them, if they wouldn't have sinned with the spies, and Moshe Rabbeinu would have gone with them into the land of Israel, so they also wouldn't have had to do anything to conquer the land. Everything was passive. But passive confidence requires you to have faith. Faith meaning that there is a picture of how this is all going to turn out well. That's what it means to think good and it will be good. That's passive confidence. And that's all faith. That was in the first redemption. This redemption is about confidence. Confidence says that Hashem is telling you, you're in the world because I want you to be my emissary. You're the one who's going to have to figure out how to solve this problem. You're the one who's going to have to figure out how to bring godliness into the world. And whatever vessel you build, I'm with you. I will follow you, says Hashem, as it were. As we learned about Avram, for whom Hashem said, Hitalech lefanai ve'yatamim, walk before me, and that will make you whole. Your wholeness depends on walking before me, as it were, leading godliness into the world. That's active confidence. So we have these two words, emunah, bitachon. Emunah is spelled Aleph, Mem, Vav, Nun, Hey. It's equal to 102. Bitachon, Bet, Tet, Chet, Vav, Nun, we said already is 75. What's the difference between the two? 102 minus 75, that's 27. Zach. It's the Rebbe's favorite number, 3 to the third power. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. So if we continue the series backwards, so the number before 27 will be 48, and the number before 48, 48 minus 27 is 21. What word have we been talking about that's equal to 21? Ekye. Aleph, Hey, Yud, Hey. God's name, I will be. And that's the name out of which these two modes of being in faith and being in confidence, come out from the Ekir, from the 21. So the series is a regular, simple series. 27 is the difference. 21 plus 27 is 48, and then plus 27 is 75 bitachon. Plus 27 more is 102. That's equal to Emunah. Okay. This we will continue with next week a little bit more. What I want to do now is I want to tie it back into the class that is also available on Facebook and on my YouTube, on what does the coronavirus really come to teach us. So there's many beautiful things that have been said over the past couple of weeks. They all have a great deal of relevance and meaning. I want to continue what we did last week. You can look at the previous class to see what that was. I'm going to do a quick recap and finish up what I didn't get a chance to do last week because something came up. I wasn't feeling so well. So the simple idea is that corona means crown. It's not exactly the crown. It's more the like the corona of the sun. It's more the rays that come out of the crown. But because that's what they see on this virus, they see these little coronas coming out. In any case, what we said is that it comes to the crown in general is the opposite of order. Order means that things are hierarchical, that there's some kind of order to things. And the crown, when it's revealed, it causes a breakup of order. That what was orderly before is no longer so orderly. And so sometimes the crown is even called tohu. It's even called chaos. Not because it's trying to say that it's entirely chaotic, but relative to the orderly revelation of godliness that we're used to. For instance, the fact that children go to school in the morning, they come back in the afternoon, that's a revelation of godliness, because we've set up our world in such a way that it's able to instruct young people in what they need to learn, which is obviously a lot of Torah. So that happens every single day, and then we have that orderly way that it's done. And then comes along some kind of event like this, which is not by chance called Corona, because it's a revelation of the crown. And by revealing the crown, by revealing this higher light of God, it sort of takes apart our usual order. And what we did last time was we looked at the sage's definition of order. That there are 5 different types of order, or the right word in English is precedence. What precedes what? Because when you say order, really what you mean to say is that something precedes something else. So if you remember, we talked about hierarchical order, which is like the order of the people in a bureaucracy. Sometimes it's called bureaucratic order, that there's always somebody who's below somebody else and so on until you reach the top. So in the United States, we would say the president precedes the vice president precedes the Speaker of the House, or however the bureaucracy works there. Then we have temporal precedence, which is the precedence we're most used to, which is in time. That yesterday precedes today, and today precedes tomorrow. Then we have what we call natural precedence. Natural precedence means going from the from the simple to the complex. We said that this is the type of precedence that is the foundational thought, or the foundational framework upon which evolution works. And many of the things that we do in the world, they build themselves on what we called natural precedence, or precedence from the simple precedes the complex. You can't do something complex before you do or before you build the simple thing. Then we said there's intellectual precedence. And the intellectual precedence, it's that the wise man precedes the fool. This has to do with what we would call that it's not about who came first. It could be that Moshe Rabbeinu came long before the other prophets that we mentioned, like Micah. And yet he precedes them not just in terms of time, but also in terms of stature. His intellectual precedence is greater. He's greater than all these other prophets. And finally, we had the causal precedence, which is the most difficult one to fully grasp, but it's the one that the ancients, in ancient philosophy, this was the groundwork for everything, about how the effect leads to the cause, but sometimes the cause precedes the effect. Usually we have effects that lead up to or certain actions that we usually think about it as cause and effect. That's how we call it today. But really there's a series of events that leads to a final conclusion. In the thought, the cause will precede the effect, meaning that I first have to think about what the goal is, and then I do the actions that lead to the goal. So we said that this also is disrupted by the coronavirus. What this all is saying is what we just said before, that for us to be able to bring about the final redemption, we have to have a revelation of the crown. Remember, we said that their revelation was of understanding. Our revelation of godliness, our faith now, we're taking from the far inspirational light, Makif Rachok. The crown is about taking that energy and transforming it into active confidence. To say it another way, it's been said a number of times on the news that usually after something like this happens, and it seems like all the markets are falling apart, the world markets are a disaster now. Everything is a disaster economically, and people are going to have a very hard time. After this happens, the growth afterwards is amazing, because there's a natural tendency that once order is broken, when it's reconstructed, when we build it again, we actually do it a lot more with a lot more strength, with a lot more action, with a lot more confidence than we did before. So to think about it in a certain sense, what we're experiencing now is the revelation of that crown, that energy from the crown, which is disrupting order, in order to allow us to transform that disruption into active energy in ourselves. To say it another way, what this means is, in terms of the markets, it means that when they do bounce back, they bounce back even further. They go further than when they were before. It takes time. But when it happens, when it begins to happen, you see that everything bounces back a lot faster than it did before. Because the disruption of order, tapping into this higher crown, is transformed into a lot of active confidence. People, you can say it just in a simple way. When you're already part of an ordered society that works a certain way, it's very hard to disrupt it. That's why we talk about today about disruptive technology. Can you actually take the order that already exists and disrupt it in some way and bring about some new idea that nobody's had before, like in the way that Amazon was disruptive to retail sales, the way that the internet was completely disruptive to the post office, so no need for the post office anymore, and so on, all these things. Disruptive is hard to do when there's a lot of order. But the more chaos there is, or the less order there is, people within themselves have a tendency to think up new orders. They have a tendency to think up new active confidence. They're confident in their ability to now create something new. So this is a tremendous opportunity for everybody who's involved in any way with Yiddishkeit to come and say, look, everything is now disrupted. Whatever you do now is like a clean slate. It's almost like you're starting anew. You have this opportunity to think anew. What do you want to do once things go back to normal, call it. It's not going to be exactly normal because the disruption is very disruptive. It's not like just even Amazon. Amazon took 20 years to disrupt retail sales. This, in the course of a few months, is completely disrupting everything that we know about society. It's changing the way that people relate to one another. Once you've been in social distancing for 2, 3, 4 months, it's very hard to go back to how you were before. You have to have a new understanding. So one of the things that we said last time was that the fact that there is social distancing, that you don't touch people, that can be taken in two ways. It can be taken as looking at people as being distant and far, or you can take it as an understanding of the holiness, the sacredness of another person. I started saying this last time, that in Chabad, in Lubavitch, there's a custom not to touch the Rebbe, not to touch the leader. Not just out of regular reverence, because he's a special man, that you know anyway. But not touching him is a sign of holding him to be sacred, holding him to be holy. Now the truth is that every Jew is that way. That's the truth. There's really no difference. In fact, if you think about it, in the time of the temple, when they practiced the laws of Tumah and Tahara, which is what we call being profane and being pure, but it was a spiritual profanity, a spiritual pureness, people were very careful not to touch one another. So it could be that they were afraid of something, but that fear is sensitivity also. In fact, when we want to translate, what does it mean to have fear of heaven? Having fear of heaven is really having sensitivity to other people. So if you're sensitive to other people, you also are not at ease at touching them, because you feel that I have to be sensitive. In the same way I have to be sensitive to your feelings, I also have to be sensitive to your body. Why is this so important? Because the body is considered to be what reflects the light of the crown. It's not the soul that reflects it. The soul is orderly. The body is considered to be relatively chaotic, meaning the body is what brings down higher light, the far inspirational light that's beyond the soul, that's actually higher than what the soul can bring down. That actually comes out through the body. So when a person is careful not to touch somebody else, that sensitivity is actually a sensitivity to a higher level of spirituality, higher than what you can gain even through what you speak. So that's one thing that comes out of this whole disruption. And we said that feeling the crown for a while, feeling the disruption, feeling the chaos, feeling that there's no order, needs to be transformed into active confidence. It has to be transformed into new technology. Technology is many things. Technology can be what we're using right now to broadcast this class, but it can also be spiritual technology. It can also be, how do I present Torah? How do I present the crux of Jewish teachings to the rest of the world? That's also technology. It's teaching them how to do things. This is what we sometimes call the fourth revolution, because one of the things that has to happen for the redemption to come to us is that the entire world has to become cognizant of God being the God who gave the Torah. So if the world doesn't understand the value of Torah, it's very hard to bring the redemption. There has to be a certain recognition of that. So when you think about technology, you think about, so what exactly is capable of bringing this message to the entire world? Most of the world, like the Rebbe said, is ready to accept this. It's ready to hear the words of Torah. So some of the ideas about disruption can tell us what kind of technology we need to use. So let's look at them. First of all, hierarchical. There's a disruption in the hierarchical precedence, in the type of order that there's somebody. Today, nobody wants to hear that you're more important than me. Everybody wants to. Democracy is not just some kind of fleeting idea, the way that Plato thought of it. Democracy is something that's ingrained in us. We all want to be equal. And the Torah sees that as a good thing. because it's a disruption of the usual social statuses that existed. So when you approach people, everybody is equal. Everybody is the same. It's very hard for somebody with a religious background to think that way. But that's one of the disruptions that has to happen. You have to treat everybody equally. So when you come and you give a message, you have to say it in the simplest possible way, the way that everybody can understand it. It refers to all people in the same way. It also has to be temporally disruptive. Temporally disruptive means you have to think about how to get a message across that continues to resonate in the person's mind even though it's already in the past. Meaning, it's to break apart the difference between past and present. The Torah was written 3,300 years ago, but it's more relevant than any text I have in my library, and I have thousands of texts. Why is it so relevant? Because it disrupted what Moshe Rabbeinu did. He disrupted the temporal hierarchy. He disrupted the temporal order. He gave something 3,300 years ago, which is only beginning to be understood now. Especially if you learn anything about Chassidus. Chassidus is taking out the inner light of what was contained in the Torah for so many generations. And in fact, when was this put into the Torah? When God created the world. And when God said, "Let there be light," he took that light and he hid it in the Torah. So that's the light from the beginning of the world is now coming out. That's disruption in terms of temporal, in terms of time. So when you get a message out, the message should be in such a way that it resonates in the person's mind. They don't even remember where it came from, but it keeps resonating. And it comes out. One of the most beautiful things about this is seeing the Rebbe's messages today. The fact that we can record is already a disruption of the flow of time, because we can record messages from the past and play them now, and suddenly we've disrupted time. The natural, the simple, comes before the complex. It goes back to the first idea, that the more simple your message. The Rebbe was one of the greatest geniuses in Jewish among the Jewish sages of all time. But when you hear his talks, most of them are so simple that a 10-year-old can understand them without any problem, without any prior knowledge almost. That genius of taking something and bringing it in a language that anybody can understand, that's disrupting the natural order, because we said the natural says that the simple comes before the complex. So we would think that the more complex the message, the more advanced it is. But here we're saying the opposite. No, the more simple the message, the more impact it has. We said that that's what the virus does also. We would think that the thing we need to fear the most is World War III. What kind of weapons are we going to use? Nobody's even thought about these weapons yet. No, that's nothing. Because those are very complex. It turns out that the thing that you have to fear the most, the thing that has the most power, is actually what's so simple it's not even alive. A virus is not even considered to be alive, by the way. That's one of the reasons why it lingers on surfaces for such a long time, because it has no metabolism. It doesn't need to take anything in. So it can stay on cardboard also. There's no difference for it. Eventually it breaks apart because of UV light or because of other things. But the simple penetrates a lot more than the complex. We said by the intellectual. Again, this goes back to the same idea. You might think in this day and age that the revolution starts from above, from the smartest people. No, it actually starts from the simplest people. You have to first reach the masses. When you reach the masses, they themselves, in what we call itaruta diltata, an awakening from below, will change everything that's on top, because the common people actually have a lot more strength than all the wise people. Why is that? Because when we say that Hashem will be revealed, we're not talking about revelation through the mind. We're not talking about how much of a sage, how much you've learned. We're talking about how the physical world will all reveal godliness. How like we said before, the body reveals godliness. And the body is equal by everybody. It's the same. When people are asleep, they're exactly the same. When people are in the grave, unfortunately, they're even more the same. That sameness, that equality between the wise man and the simple man actually gives a lot more strength to the simple man, because there's simply more of them. There's simply more simple people. So the message, or whatever technology you're developing, as we see today, the technologies that are disruptive are not the ones that are catering to somebody who has $1 billion in the bank. They're catering to somebody who doesn't have any money in the bank, because anybody can use them. It's even that way with gaining popularity of an application. Any app that wants to gain popularity has to be offered for free so that anybody can use it. You don't have to have a deep pocket in order to use it, because you want to cater to the simple people. And it's actually they who decide what will persevere, what will penetrate, what will disrupt reality. Finally, in the causal, you have to think about the end before the cause. You have to think about where you're going. You have to think all the time. That's what active confidence is about. That I have in front of me my whole time. This is what we'll learn in the next few classes. That before you even start any kind of project, you have to have a clear vision of where you want it to go. If you don't have a clear vision of where you want it to go, it's impossible to take the first step. Well, the reason people have such a hard time taking the first step is because they don't have a clear picture of where they want to go in the first place. You have to have that. Afterwards, you take it apart. You take that picture apart and you start building a timeline and how you're actually going to approach it. This is all part of Torah coaching that we'll talk about in the next classes. But that picture of having the end before the cause, of having the goal very clearly in your mind before you begin, that has to follow you all the time in this age. It's also what we're being forced to do, because the virus is sort of forcing people to think about, what are you doing? You can't just do anything you want. You have to think about, what do you want to achieve? How will you achieve that? You have to have a picture of that. So that for now is our insights from the virus. There's a lot more to be talked about, but let's recap. When we came out of Egypt, it was taking faith and turning it into passive confidence. Passive confidence means just having a picture of how you want the final result, the good result, what you want it to look like. That's called think good and it will be good. And God does the rest. That's called passive confidence. So it was taking faith, the faith they had for 210 years that it would be redeemed, and transforming it into passive confidence. In our generation, when we're faced with the final redemption, which we're coming up to, what we have to do is take from faith and transform it. It's a higher faith, transform it into what we call active confidence. In other words, God is not going to do the actions for us. He's giving us the autonomy, the strength. He's giving us the strength to perform these actions that need to be taken in order to bring about the final redemption. So we said this is also part of each individual. When we're young, God gives us certain things passively. Most people, 99% of the world, 95%, maybe it's only 9%, the first few years of their lives are relatively passive. The success comes passively. By the way, the health of the body for the first 40 years or 45 years is also passive. You don't have to work on it so much. If you have, God willing, most of the people in the world, 95% of the people in the world have a healthy body. They don't have to do very much to keep that health. They can be pretty passive. The success you meet with, hopefully, everybody's experienced this in some area in their youth, that there were certain areas that they had success that came without hard work. That's how the initial redemption is, the initial part of life is. It's called a time of passive success. Eventually you come to the place where now you're required to do things yourself, that we call active confidence. So why did God give us the initial success passively, relatively passively, without us doing too much? Because He wanted to teach us, first of all, that He's with us and that He wants us to succeed. He wants us to do good things. I have to see it once. I have to believe that you're with me. That, by the way, is what parents are supposed to do. The reason that the first part of life is relatively passively successful is a lot because of our parents. They do a lot of the work for us. They make a lot of it possible. But why do they do that? Why do they do that? They show us an example. They show us an example that it's possible to succeed. Once you're out of your parents' house, once you begin to become independent, and the same thing God wants from us is call it a mature people already. You don't have to be my children anymore in that sense. You don't have to be always being taken care of. Take care of yourselves. That was the Rebbe's biggest message, that it's up to us now to do what needs to be done. That's called active confidence. Hashem already showed us when we came out of Egypt that we should be confident that we're able to leave the exile. And he showed us that in order to convince us that 2,000 years after the final exile began, we also have the ability, we should have the confidence that we can actively emerge, take ourselves out of the exile that we've been in for 2,000 years. So the same thing applies to the person. Once you're independent, you have to continue to foster confidence, but this time it's up to you. You're going to have to do all the work. And to do all the work, you have to think about what the final result that you want is, and chart a course from here to there, and figure out how you want to get from here to there. So thank you very much for everybody who joined, and I hope to see you next week. God willing, after all this has been disruptive enough. But if not, if we need more disruption, then that's the way to take it. That it's more disruption of the order, not to be afraid of anything. Everything is in God's hands. It's all planned. It's all meant to bring about our powers of active confidence. All the best to everybody. Good health.